The Burger King was bustling with activity that evening. Families sat together, enjoying their meals, while couples chatted over burgers and fries. In the farthest corner, a 62-year-old man sat alone, quietly eating his meal. His clothes were old and slightly tattered, but his face held a sense of calm that contrasted with the chaos around him. At a table nearby, 3 teenagers, no older than 17, sat with their expensive sneakers and branded t-shirts, laughing amongst themselves. They had been eyeing the old man for a while, whispering and smirking. "Hey, look at Grandpa over there," one of them snickered, nodding toward the man. "Think he even paid for that burger? Or is he just hoping to grab someone's leftovers?" The others burst into laughter, attracting the attention of a few customers, but no one intervened. "Maybe we should be generous," the second teen added, pulling a single coin from his pocket and flipping it onto the floor near the man's table. "Hey, old man, you dropped your paycheck." The third teen took out his phone, grinning as he began recording. #BrokeGrandpa. This is going viral." The old man didn't react. He simply took another bite of his burger, his face expressionless. But what the teenagers didn't know was that someone else had been watching them. Someone who wasn't about to stay silent. A man sitting nearby slowly set down his drink, his eyes narrowing as he watched the cruel display unfold. He had seen enough, and in just a few moments, these teenagers were about to regret everything. The teenagers continued laughing, finding their own jokes hilarious, completely unaware of the storm brewing around them. The old man remained still, unfazed, chewing his food at a slow, steady pace. But across the restaurant, a tall, broad-shouldered man had seen everything. His expression was unreadable, but there was a quiet intensity in his eyes. He took a deep breath, then rose from his seat, his movements deliberate and controlled. As he approached, the teenagers barely noticed him. The one holding his phone was still recording, zooming in on the old man's worn-out jacket. "Hey," the tall man said, his deep voice cutting through the noise. The 3 boys froze and looked up at him. "You think that's funny?" he asked, his tone calm but firm. "Mocking someone you don't even know?" The boy with the phone smirked but looked a little uneasy. "Relax, dude. It's just a joke." The tall man's gaze didn't waver. "You sure about that?" The second teen scoffed. "What's your problem, man? It's not like he cares." He gestured at the old man, who still hadn't reacted. The stranger glanced at the elderly man before looking back at the teenagers. "You have no idea who you're disrespecting," he said, his voice now laced with something heavier, something that made the air in the room feel heavier. For the first time, the teens felt a flicker of doubt. The restaurant had grown quieter. Some customers had stopped eating, watching the scene unfold. The tension was palpable. The tall man took another step closer, his presence towering over them. "I suggest you apologize now," he said. But the teenagers weren't ready to back down yet. Not yet. And that was their mistake. The teenagers exchanged uneasy glances. The tall man's presence was unsettling, but their pride wouldn't let them back down so easily. The boy holding the phone forced a cocky grin. "Apologize? For what? We were just messing around." The second teen chuckled. "Yeah, no harm done, right, Grandpa?" he said, raising his voice, making sure the entire restaurant heard him. The old man finally looked up, his deep-set eyes locking onto the teenagers. There was no anger in them, no visible irritation, just a calm, unreadable expression. But before he could speak, the tall man stepped forward, his broad frame casting a shadow over the boys. "You really think this is funny?" he asked again, his voice lower this time. More controlled, more dangerous. The third teen, the quietest of the group, shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "Dude, let's just drop it." But the first teen, emboldened by his audience, scoffed. "What's your deal, man? Are you his son or something?" The tall man let out a slow breath, his jaw tightening. "No," he said, "but I know who he is." The restaurant fell silent. The way he said it, heavy, meaningful, final, made everyone pause. The teens blinked, confused. The one with the phone lowered his camera slightly. "Wait, what do you mean?" The old man remained still, but something in his expression had changed, a flicker of recognition as he studied the tall man. "You're about to find out," the tall man said, "and I promise you, you're not going to like it." The teenagers suddenly didn't feel so confident anymore. The teenagers, who had been so bold and full of laughter, suddenly felt a shift in the air. The The tall man's words hung over them like a heavy cloud. "You're about to find out," he had said. The boy with the phone swallowed hard. "What are you talking about?" he asked, trying to sound unfazed, but his voice lacked the confidence he had moments ago. The tall man didn't answer right away. Instead, he turned to the elderly man and gave him a respectful nod. The old man sighed, setting down his burger carefully before leaning back in his seat. He looked tired, but there was something else in his gaze now. Something sharp, something powerful. "You boys think you know everything," the old man said, his voice calm yet firm. "But you don't know a damn thing about me." The second teenager, still trying to hold on to his arrogance, scoffed. "So what? You're just some old guy eating alone at Burger King. Why should we care?" The tall man's jaw clenched. His next words came out slow, deliberate. "Because this old guy is a former Marine, a war veteran, a man who has risked his life for this country, while you sit here laughing at him like he's nothing." A hush fell over the restaurant. Even the sound of French fry grease sizzling in the kitchen seemed distant now. The teenagers froze. The phone in the first boy's hand trembled slightly. The elderly man's expression didn't change, but there was a quiet intensity in his eyes now, as if he were seeing past the boys, past their youth, past their ignorance, past their arrogance. The first boy opened his mouth, ready to argue, but no words came out. For the first time that evening, he had nothing to say. The reality of their actions had just hit them like a freight train. The teenagers sat in stunned silence. Just moments ago, they had been laughing, joking, and recording their cruelty for social media. But now, the weight of the truth settled heavily on their shoulders. The first boy, still gripping his phone, looked at the old man with wide eyes. You were in the military?" he stammered. The elderly man didn't blink. "I was more than in the military," he said, his voice carrying the weight of experience. "I served in places you wouldn't last a single night." The tall man crossed his arms, his eyes still locked on the teenagers. "This man fought for your freedom. He put his life on the line so you could sit here, stuffing your faces with burgers and mocking people you know nothing about." The second teen shifted uncomfortably in his seat. We didn't know," he muttered, avoiding eye contact. The old man let out a slow breath, his expression unreadable. "No, you didn't," he said simply. "You saw an old man eating alone and you thought that made me weak." The third teenager, the quietest one, finally spoke. "Were you in a war?" he asked hesitantly. The old man's eyes darkened slightly, as if recalling memories he'd rather forget. "More than one," he answered. "And I lost more friends than I can count." The words hit the teenagers like a slap. Suddenly, their jokes weren't funny anymore. The phone in the first boy's hand felt like it weighed 100 pounds. Slowly, he turned it off and set it down on the table. The entire restaurant was silent, everyone now listening, watching, waiting for what would happen next. The weight of the old man's words hung in the air, pressing down on the teenagers like a force they couldn't escape. The usual cocky smirks and sarcastic laughter had disappeared. In their place was something unfamiliar: shame. The first teenager, Kevin, rubbed the back of his neck, suddenly feeling too hot. He had been so sure this was just another joke, another moment to capture for views. But now he felt like a fool. The second boy, Lucas, cleared his throat. "We didn't mean any harm," he said, though his voice lacked conviction. The tall man stared at them, his expression unreadable. "Didn't mean any harm," he repeated, his voice low but firm. "You humiliated a man who risked his life for people like you. You mocked him in front of a room full of strangers. And for what? A few laughs? A couple of likes on social media?" The teenagers shifted in their seats, avoiding his gaze. The old man, who had remained silent for a moment, finally spoke. "You think respect is just given?" he asked, his voice calm but filled with unshakable authority. "No, respect is earned, and not by wearing expensive sneakers or having the latest phone." He leaned forward slightly, his weathered hands resting on the table. "I earned my respect crawling through the mud, carrying wounded brothers on my back, watching friends take their last breaths in battle." His eyes met each of theirs, one by one. "And you've done nothing but laugh at a man you don't even know." The third boy, Tim, swallowed hard. The guilt was sinking in now, deeper than any of them had expected. For the first time that night, they wished they had never walked into that Burger King. A heavy silence blanketed the restaurant. The three teenagers, once so full of confidence, now sat frozen, their gazes fixed on the table. The weight of their actions had finally caught up with them. The tall man, who had defended the old veteran, sighed and took a step back. His piercing gaze softened just slightly. "You boys are young," he said. "You make mistakes. But the question is, do you learn from them?" The teenagers exchanged glances. No one spoke. The old man leaned forward, his scarred hands clasped together. "Let me tell you something," he said. "You'll meet a lot of people in your life. Some will have money, some won't. Some will dress nice, some won't. Some will sit alone at a table, just like I did tonight." His tired eyes studied them carefully. "But you never know their story until you take the time to listen. You judged me before you knew a single thing about me." Kevin, the loudest of the three, bit his lip, his arrogance from earlier now completely gone. "We didn't think, we just—" His words trailed off. "You just assumed," the old man finished for him. Lucas, usually the follower, nodded slowly. "We shouldn't have done that." His voice was barely above a whisper. The third boy, Tim, who had recorded the whole thing on his phone, looked down at the device in his hand. The thought of posting the video now made him feel sick. How could they have been so cruel? A few customers in the restaurant watched the scene unfold, some of them softly nodding in approval at the old man's words. Then, the veteran did something unexpected. He smiled. Not a big, wide smile, but a small, knowing one. "Good," he said. "Now let's see if you boys can do something right." The teenagers straightened up, suddenly aware that this conversation wasn't over yet. The three teenagers sat up straighter, unsure of what was coming next. The old man's small, knowing smile lingered, but there was something serious in his eyes, something that told them this moment wasn't just about their mistake. It was about what they would do next. The tall man, who had been watching them closely, crossed his arms. "The way I see it," he said, "you boys have two choices. You can walk out of here, pretend this never happened, and keep being the kind of people who tear others down for fun." Kevin swallowed hard. The words hit like a punch to the gut. "Or," the man continued, "you can prove that you've actually learned something tonight." Lucas shifted uncomfortably. "How?" he asked. The veteran glanced at their table, then at his own nearly empty tray. "Start by doing something simple. Something that doesn't take much effort, but shows that you actually mean it when you say you're sorry." Kevin followed his gaze and realized what he meant. Slowly, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a crumpled $20 bill. It wasn't much, but it was all he had on him. Without a word, he got up, walked to the counter, and bought the old man another meal. When he returned, he set the tray in front of the veteran. "It's not much," he muttered, looking embarrassed. "But I figured maybe you'd want a fresh meal." For a long moment, the old man just stared at him. Then slowly he nodded. "Thank you." His voice was soft but genuine. Lucas and Tim exchanged glances, then dug into their own wallets. Lucas handed over a few extra dollars, and Tim, after hesitating, placed his phone on the table. "I recorded what we did," he admitted. "I was going to post it to make fun of you, but I think I should delete it instead." The veteran's lips curled into another faint smile. "That's a start," he said. A shift had happened, something small but important. The boys had walked into that Burger King looking for a laugh. Now they were walking out with a lesson they would never forget. Kevin, Lucas, and Tim sat in silence, watching as the old man took a bite of the fresh meal they had bought him. The restaurant, once loud and full of chatter, seemed quieter now, as if everyone around them understood that something important had just happened. Kevin's stomach twisted. Just minutes ago, he had been laughing at this man, treating him like a joke. Now, he felt ashamed. He had never thought much about respect before. It was just a word adults threw around. But tonight, he was beginning to understand its true meaning. Lucas sighed, rubbing his hands together. "We were real idiots," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. Tim, who was usually the quiet one, finally spoke up. "I think we just never really thought about how our words might affect someone." He hesitated, then looked at the old man. "I'm really sorry for what we did." The veteran looked at each of them, his tired but sharp eyes studying their faces. After a long pause, he nodded. "Regret is easy," he said. "Change is harder." The tall man, who had been watching the exchange, uncrossed his arms. "He's right. Feeling guilty doesn't mean much if you don't do something about it. Kevin frowned. What do you mean? The man leaned against the table. You made fun of someone without knowing their story. But how often do you think that happens to other people? To kids in your school? To people on the street? Lucas's eyes widened slightly. He had never thought about it like that before. You don't just fix things by saying sorry once, the veteran added. You fix them by changing the way you treat people, every day. The weight of those words settled heavily on the boys. They had come to Burger King expecting a fun night out, but they were leaving with a lesson they would carry forever. Kevin took a deep breath. I don't know if we can make up for what we did, he admitted, but I think we can do better. The old man gave him a small, approving nod. Then start now. And just like that, everything changed. The three teenagers sat in silence, digesting the old man's words. Regret is easy, change is harder. The phrase echoed in Kevin's mind like a challenge, one he wasn't sure how to answer. Lucas shifted uncomfortably in his seat. So what do we do now? The veteran set his fork down and folded his hands together. That's up to you, he said simply. You can walk out of here and pretend none of this ever happened. Or you can remember tonight and carry it with you. Use it to make better choices. Tim hesitated, his fingers hovering over his phone screen. I was going to post that video, he admitted. I thought it was funny, but now I feel like a complete idiot. Kevin finished for him, cracking a weak smile. Tim let out a breathy laugh. Yeah, the tall man who had been watching them all night smirked. It's good you feel bad, means you've got some sense in you. His expression turned serious, but guilt doesn't mean much unless it leads to action. Kevin thought about the kids at school, the ones who got picked on, the ones who sat alone in the cafeteria, the ones he and his friends never paid attention to. How many times had they laughed at someone else's expense without thinking twice? Lucas tapped the table, deep in thought. You said respect isn't something you can buy, he said, looking at the veteran. So how do we earn it? The old man's lips curled into a small smile. By giving it. The words were so simple, yet they hit harder than anything the teenagers had heard before. Tim nodded slowly. Okay, he said. We get it now. The veteran leaned back in his chair. I hope so, he said, because the world has enough people tearing each other down. What we need are people willing to build others up. For the first time that night, Kevin, Lucas, and Tim truly understood. And for the first time in a long while, they were ready to change. Kevin, Lucas, and Tim sat quietly, absorbing everything the veteran had said. They had walked into this Burger King with a sense of superiority, mocking someone they thought was beneath them. But now, they felt humbled, even embarrassed. Kevin looked down at his hands, fidgeting with the edge of his sleeve. I never really thought about how people feel when they get laughed at, he admitted. I guess I just assumed it didn't matter. The old man nodded knowingly. Because you've never been on the other side of it, he said. It's easy to laugh when you're the one with the power. But when the tables turn, it's not so funny, is it? Lucas let out a long breath, shaking his head. No, it's not. The tall man who had defended the veteran leaned in slightly. You know, you guys aren't the first to make this kind of mistake, he said, and you won't be the last. But what sets people apart is whether they learn from it or just keep doing the same thing. Tim swallowed hard. I don't want to be that guy anymore, he muttered. The one who makes fun of people just to get a laugh. The veteran studied them carefully, then gave a slight nod. Then don't be. Kevin looked up, his gaze meeting the old man's. It's not just about you, is it? He asked. It's about how we treat everyone. The veteran smiled, a hint of approval in his expression. Now you're getting it. For the first time that night, the three boys felt different. They had come in as the type of people who mocked others without a second thought. But now, they were beginning to understand the weight of their actions. They weren't just learning a lesson, they were changing. The realization hung heavy in the air. Kevin, Lucas, and Tim had come to mock a stranger, but they were leaving with a new perspective. The veterans' words still echoed in their minds. Respect isn't something you can buy. You earn it by giving it. Kevin cleared his throat, glancing at the old man. I guess just saying sorry isn't enough, huh? The veteran shook his head. Words are easy. What matters is what you do next. Lucas rubbed the back of his neck, suddenly uncomfortable. I feel like we should do something, he said. Like, actually make this right. Tim, still holding his phone, frowned at the screen. I was going to post that video, he admitted, to humiliate you. He looked up, guilt written all over his face. I think I should delete it. The veteran raised an eyebrow. That's a start. Tim didn't hesitate. With a deep breath, he hit delete. The post that was meant to mock an innocent man was gone. It wasn't much, but it was the first real action he had taken to undo the damage. Kevin exhaled, feeling lighter. You know, we don't want to be those kinds of people anymore, the ones who just laugh at others for fun. The tall man who had defended the veteran smirked. Then don't be. Change starts when you decide to act differently. Lucas drummed his fingers against the table. I think we should do more than just delete the video. We should spread the opposite message. Tim and Kevin looked at him in surprise. What do you mean? Tim asked. Lucas sat up straighter, determination in his eyes. Instead of posting that video to make fun of him, we should share what we learned tonight. Maybe if people see that respect matters, they'll think twice before treating someone like a joke. The old man watched them carefully, his lips curling into a faint smile. Now that, he said, is real growth. The teenagers had walked into Burger King as bullies, but for the first time, they were leaving as something else entirely. Lucas's words lingered in the air. Instead of spreading hate, they could spread a message of respect. It was a simple idea, but one that felt powerful. Kevin leaned forward. You really think people would care? I mean, it's not like we're influencers or anything. Tim shrugged. Maybe not, but we've got followers, and people love drama. If we tell the truth about what happened here, maybe it'll make them think. Lucas nodded. It's not about going viral, it's about doing the right thing. The tall man, who had stood up for the veteran, watched them with quiet amusement. You three sure do learn fast, he remarked. One moment, you're making fun of an old man, and the next, you're trying to educate people. That's called growth. Kevin glanced at the veteran. Would you be okay with us sharing this story? We could write about what happened tonight, how we messed up, what you taught us. The veteran studied them for a long moment before finally nodding. If it helps even one person treat someone better than you did today, then yes, go ahead. Tim hesitated, then turned his phone's camera toward the veteran. Would you want to say something? A message for people who might watch. The old man chuckled. I don't need to say much. Just remind them of this. You never know someone's story, so don't be so quick to judge. Tim hit record and captured the veteran's simple yet powerful statement. There were no fancy edits, no jokes, no clickbait, just the truth. Kevin looked at his friends. Let's post it. Lucas nodded. Let's do it. As they hit upload, none of them knew how many people would see it. But they did know one thing. Tonight had changed them forever. The video was live. Kevin, Lucas, and Tim sat at their table, their hearts pounding as they refreshed their phones. The video, barely a few minutes old, was already gaining traction. Comments started pouring in, and the reactions were unlike anything they had expected. This is the kind of content we need more of. Respect matters. I almost scrolled past, but wow, this hit hard. We all need this reminder. Thank you for sharing. Tim stared at the screen, stunned. People are actually paying attention. Lucas nodded, a small smile forming on his lips. Because it's real. No fake pranks, no staged drama, just the truth. Kevin swallowed hard, scrolling through the messages. Then his eyes widened. Guys, look at this. The others leaned in. Among the hundreds of comments, one stood out, a message from a well-known veterans organization. We'd love to connect with this hero. Can someone help us reach him? The three boys looked at each other, realization dawning on them. This wasn't just about them anymore. Their mistake, their moment of disrespect, had led to something bigger. Lucas turned to the old man. Sir, I think a lot of people want to hear your story. The veteran chuckled, shaking his head. I've lived my life, never thought I'd be trending on the internet. The tall man who had defended the veteran smirked. You deserve this. People should know what real sacrifice looks like. Kevin set his phone down, exhaling slowly. We can make sure they do. As the night went on, the video kept spreading. It was no longer just a lesson for three teenagers. It was a lesson for the world. By the next morning, the video had gone viral. News outlets picked it up, veteran organizations shared it, and thousands of comments flooded in. Many thanking the old man for his service, others admitting they had once judged people unfairly too. Kevin, Lucas, and Tim sat together at school, still processing everything. "It's crazy," Lucas muttered. "We were just messing around, thinking it was a joke, and now people are actually changing the way they see things." Kevin nodded, scrolling through more comments. You never know someone's story until you take the time to listen. One message stood out. "This video made me rethink how I treat people. Thank you for sharing it." Tim looked up. "We should go back to Burger King today. Talk to him again. Make sure he's okay with all of this." That afternoon, they returned to the restaurant. The old man was sitting in the same corner, this time with a fresh meal in front of him, a meal paid for by a stranger who had recognized him from the video. He looked up as the boys approached, a knowing smile on his face. "You three again," he said with a chuckle. "Didn't think I'd see you so soon." Lucas scratched the back of his neck. "We just wanted to check on you and to thank you, again." The veteran nodded. "You didn't have to come back, but I'm glad you did." Kevin took a deep breath. "We were awful to you that night, but you didn't just get mad at us. You taught us something. We won't forget it." The old man studied them for a moment, then slowly extended his hand. One by one, they shook it, not just as an apology, but as a sign of respect. As they left, Tim looked back one last time. The veteran sat with a quiet sense of peace, no longer just some old man in the corner. Now, in their eyes, and in the eyes of thousands, he was a hero. And thanks to him, 3 teenagers had learned a lesson that would stay with them forever. Respect isn't given based on looks, it's earned through actions. And sometimes it only takes one moment to change everything. Hit the like button if you believe in treating everyone with dignity. Comment below if you've ever learned a lesson about respect the hard way. Subscribe for more inspiring stories that remind us all to be better, kinder people. Together, we can make the world a more understanding and compassionate place, one story at a time.